I'm Dr. Nick Lowe. I'm reader in classical literature here at Royal Holloway, University of London, and I also write on science fiction film. My name is Adam Roberts. I am a professor of 19th century literature at Royal Holloway, which is part of the University of London, and I'm also a writer of science fiction novels and utopian fantasias and things like that.
I'm a British academic. I specialise in work on science fiction. Historically, it's been science fiction literature, but I also do stuff on film and television and other media. I'm interested in science fiction architecture and art, as well as the written and the visual stuff.
My name is Christos Kallo Jr. I just finished a PhD at Birkbeck, University of London. My PhD was on utopian literature. Specifically, my PhD was on the relationship between utopia and nirvana, and it was a creative writing PhD, so I explored that through short stories, most of them science fiction.
Well, utopia is a cognitive tool invented really by the ancient Greeks for thinking about our own world in imaginary reflections of it.
Utopia for me isn't necessarily going to be utopia for other people. I mean, from the start it's had that double meaning of a place that is a good place or a place that doesn't exist. So I think from the start it's being an imagined place.
The term utopia means no place. It's a combination of the Greek words ou and topos, so that's literally non-place.
It seems to me as a concept, utopia has changed radically since it was first thought. The idea that we could have a perfect world, a world in which everybody could be as happy as it's possible to be, is a very ancient idea. But when it's formulated by the ancient Greeks, the world was quite a horrible place. And imagining that the world could be better was imagining an achievable goal. It was something that could actually happen. And in that sense, the origins of utopia become something that you can plan for, something you can try and make real.
It goes back ultimately to Homer's Odyssey, where the hero encounters various kinds of ideal alternative society and one way or another rejects them all for a variety of reasons. And this becomes a great literary tradition in antiquity through theatre, through philosophy, through the construction and sometimes the attempt to engineer imaginary states. And science fiction has inherited that very rich ancient tradition of thinking about alternative worlds as a way of thinking about our world.
I think that the problem with utopia is it's always going to be a compromise between what would make you happy and what would make the greatest number of people happy. And as tastes clearly vary, then that's a very difficult circle to square.
For me, utopia has to exist both outside and within the individual. So for me, utopia has to be individual perfection and social perfection. It has to be shared as well as personal. It has to be both public and private.
Plato himself, of course, was the central idea of his philosophy was that this world, the world we live in, is not the real world. The real world is the world that we build with our imagination and with the tools of philosophy. So the idea that utopia is somehow inferior for being fantasy is one that its principal architects in antiquity would have rejected out of hand as the exact opposite of why utopia is a useful concept. Utopia is always coming, but it never arrives. That's the whole point of utopia. Sometimes, of course, it's been and gone. Plato's other great utopia, the utopia of Atlantis in his Timaeus and Critias, was imagined as having existed in the past, as having been an ideal state which fell apart and which perhaps would be recoverable. He's drawing on myths of the Golden Age that go right back to the very beginnings of Greek literature, and indeed before literature has any kind of textual form at all. So these are deep, deep dreams. The one time that utopia never is now. It's always in a state of not quite actualized possibility.
At the moment, it's very difficult to see that utopia is coming in any near future. Post 9/11, where there's been this huge kind of political division between the West and the not West, to grossly simplify, that there's a whole set of freedoms that would be central to most people's utopia in the West, which non-Western people would found as being hell. So until we find a way of resolving that, it seems very difficult to see how we can get to utopia in this world.
I think things have changed now. I don't think we live in a perfect world, but if we had a time traveller come from the 5th century BC to now, he or she would be astonished at all the wealth of opportunities that we have, the medical science that we have, the nutrition, the reductions in infant mortality, the longevity, the possibilities that technology make. As far as they would be concerned, we are already living in a utopia. So I think that the fact that people still believe in utopia now, they still invest in it, they still write about it, means something different. I think utopia has stopped being something practically achievable and become a fantasy realm that is governed mostly by psychological and personal and often psychosexual concerns.
It seems difficult to see that there would be a utopia with everyone in it. I think there's a percentage of the 1% are presumably fairly comfortable at the moment, but the rest of us maybe not so much.
There's another way of looking at it. We could look at it as a question of almost spirit or consciousness, or how we feel about where we are. And it's possible to be very materially well off and still feel miserable and unhappy and unfulfilled. And that's hard, I think, to quantify. It's hard to know whether people really feel in themselves happier than they did 100 years ago. Maybe people were materially poorer then, but somehow happier in themselves because they had a more authentic or grounded experience. Now my guess is, I don't think that's true. I think we're probably on balance happier now, as well as being materially better off now. But I could see the case being argued. I mean, my main point, I suppose, is that I don't think utopia is now a matter of coming up with practical blueprints to make a perfect world. I think there's an ameliorative logic to history which has crossed a threshold by which we now say, I'm not sure we need to tear everything down and build it all up again in perfection. I think things are better than they were, and they will be better tomorrow. And that means that the persistence of utopia, the fact that people are still fascinated by utopia, speaks to something other than practical social engineering. Utopian thinking would be a way of saying, is there another way to structure human society so that we get growth without that being predicated upon a crisis that demonizes some other somewhere else? Is there a way in which we could all simply be part of a global family and yet still feel energized enough to address all the injustices and problems in the world?
It's interesting, we're speaking in the week that a film called Tomorrowland came out and rather flopped, but has as its theme this very subject of how a utopia could be built to rescue us from a time of crisis, and how the dreams of 50 years ago, the dreams that built the Disney empire, seem to be incompatible with a world of crisis. It's a deeply incoherent film, and it comes up with an interesting set of answers according to which the thing that will save the world is the ability to imagine optimistically a better world rather than to think about crisis. But it does linger on the dream that utopia was once possible and now isn't, and how we might restore the possibility of an ideal world, a dream science fictional future to our own present day.